Good afternoon. Sorry, everybody, we're late. We had a couple technical difficulties, and we were trying to make very good slides for you
We were
guys.
getting stuff set up, so
Yeah. Well, welcome to Close Up with Jesus, episode 21, guys. We are on episode 21 now. It's pretty cool.
yeah, it's cool. We actually came up with more ideas for the next few videos, so
Yeah.
now we don't gotta worry about that.
Yeah, and sorry about this little RGB thing right here. We have to use it because otherwise you can't really hear us with the other microphones. But if we put it on the table, it can't hear us. Otherwise, there's a lot of static. That was part of the
But for
technical
whatever
difficulties.
reason, it works perfect at my house whenever it's on my desk.
It makes no sense whatsoever. I think it's just because it's like, you're just like closer to like mouth level.
I mean, it's to my chest how I sit. It's like basically to my chest, and I'm like right here, and then the mic's right there. So
Yeah, okay, that's probably why. It's probably just I don't know how this thing works, but we know it works. So today we're gonna be talking about the 10 plagues of Egypt. Yes, the plagues that plagued the Egyptians. If you want the short, the
short story?
the short story. Basically, Moses said, "Let my people go." Thus saith the Lord.
Pharaoh said, "No."
And so now God's like, okay,
Well, really, Pharaoh actually said yes at first, didn't he? And then he said no.
we're gonna get into that.
Like he switched.
He's oh my gosh, sometimes I think is he stupid? Is he just like really stupid? I think it's not that he's stupid. I
think
thought
it
that,
was
but
like it's like a
pride.
kid or it's just like a kid going to an ice cream store. There's too many options.
I want this plague or frogs. No, I think it's because like what's the 3 ways he gets us? Satan gets us lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and pride of life. I think
Yes.
pride of life really got in his way
Yeah.
a lot, because like they viewed him as a god, and we're gonna get into that. But today we're talking about the plagues and how they struck down a lot of the major gods the Egyptians viewed. So we're gonna start with the first plague, which was the Nile. Can you hold this for a second?
Yeah.
Which was the Nile turning to blood. And that went after the first god that we're going to talk about is Hapi, Hapi. He was the god of the Nile. Sometimes he was a goddess, but most of the time he's depicted as a guy. The reason it's so confusing is because Egypt changed its gods a lot to suit the whims of the pharaoh. But he...
Like most politicians nowadays.
Most politicians, yeah. Sounds about right. But God told Moses to
Let my people go.
sweet Jesus,
We're
Let people
we're
go.
sleep deprived, I think.
just a little bit. I just worked at a spiritual retreat, so I'm just a little tired.
Yeah, that too.
But he told Aaron or Moses to go talk to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said no, so Aaron dipped his staff, his rod, it says, into the Nile and turned it to blood. The magicians of Pharaoh then did the same thing.
But they did it in a smaller.
They did it in a small container, so
in
it's
a
probably
bowl.
some.
It was like a red
magic.
clay, probably.
Yeah, it's
It
probably
just,
yeah.
It's just an illusion. That's all it was.
But what Aaron did was real because it did the entire Nile
And it stayed like that. It came
7
from
days.
up there and down
for 7 days.
The way they depict it in what is that little cartoon?
I know what you're talking about. Prince of Egypt.
Yeah, in the Prince of Egypt, they show
by DreamWorks.
They show a little. They pull out a little bowl and they show how they
Except
sneakily put something in
The
there.
only thing they did wrong with that was they did Moses putting the rod in
Yeah.
and not Aaron.
Yeah.
Aaron does I think it's the first 3 plagues. He starts the first 3 plagues. Then after that, it's Moses. But he does that first. And then the magicians did it. They make an illusion. They make a copy of it. They copycat God. But theirs only lasts that day. Theirs lasts for 7 days. So that strikes down Hapi to show, hey, your God of the Nile holds no power over it. Our God does. Still, Pharaoh's like, I'm not impressed. My magicians did the same thing. So you're like, okay.
And a small note that I want to bring up is, so whenever you make a mockery of God, God's gonna make a mockery of you, essentially. Like a big example. We've already talked about that football example, but this is one that happened more recently that I've seen on Instagram. Basically, these people had a parade thing, and they were mocking God having this giant devil beat on a tiny, like, dressed up Jesus, right? It's in a different country and
Okay.
stuff. And then within I think the same week, they had a huge flood that wiped out the entire city that was right there where the exact parade happened. So, make a mockery of God, he's going to make a mockery of you.
Yeah, would not be advised. Egyptians learned this the hard way. So after that, after Happy, Pharaoh still wasn't impressed and said no. So again, Moses goes, "Hey, let my people go." He says no again. So now God goes after the goddess of fertility.
I call her Frog Lady.
Hecate, who has the head of a frog, and he gets Aaron to once again put his rod, his staff, over the water. This is in Exodus chapter 8, by the way. The last one was in Exodus chapter 7, verse 14 through 25, is the Nile. This one is the frogs, which is in Exodus chapter 8, verse 1 through verse 15. And the Lord brought many frogs into the land, and the magicians did the same thing. They went again, okay, we can't be shown up by this guy. We can't get rid of the frogs, so let's just make more frogs.
Let's make more frogs.
They went, let's make more frogs. So they made more frogs. Mm-hmm. They couldn't get rid of the frogs. Once they summoned the frogs, they couldn't get rid of them. They're like, oh, crap, what do we do now, guys? And so Pharaoh summons Moses and gets Moses to beseech the Lord to get rid of the frogs. So again, we see the magicians are copycatting God.
Mm-hmm.
But we see again, their frog lady had no power over the frogs and had no power over the fertility.
Right, Pharaoh came and asked Moses for help getting rid of, which, like, if you have that quick of a switch from your confidence in your God, you know,
to be like, yeah. So we see right here that you can kind of like track Pharaoh's mindset throughout this. So the first time he sees his magicians do the same thing, so he's like, it doesn't matter. 7 days go by, he's like, all right, what the heck are the magicians doing? We see the magicians go, we can't get rid of the frogs, but we won't be shown up, so we're gonna create more frogs. And Pharaoh's like, what are y'all doing? This is so stupid. And so he gets Moses to get rid of the frogs. And then we see with the third plague, Geb, who is the god of the earth and dust in Egyptian mythos,
lore.
And his job was to basically like be the earth itself and to keep things in order.
He knows way more about these guys than I do. He likes that sort of stuff. I like it too. I'm more of like supernatural stuff, and he's more of like gods. They're fake, but they're interesting.
Yeah, I was really, when I was younger, I really like borderline obsessed with like mythology. Yeah. I learned Greek, I learned Roman, I learned Egyptian, I learned a little bit of Persian. The Persia's weird. I learned, what's the place called? Euphrates,
Russian.
Tigris area. Did not learn Russian. Russian's too far for me.
Yeah. And then I'm over here. I'm
Norse.
more science and like just interesting facts.
Oh, and immediately after Exodus verse 15, we go into this one where God makes Aaron. I think this is the last one Aaron does. Aaron touches his rod to the dust of the earth, and all the dust itself, not like summoned from it, becomes lice.
Yep.
All the dust becomes lice. The lice don't come from the dust. The dust becomes lice. So God made so much life from dust, just like man. He made man from dust. Well, now lice become from dust to plague man.
Mm-hmm.
The magicians went, let's make the dust real quick and try to make lice. They couldn't. They said, actually, I think it's in this verse. Hold on, fellas. I want to make sure I do this right. I don't want to misquote things.
Or pull up the complete wrong verse.
There it is. All right. So in this verse in Exodus chapter 8, we see right here, verse 17. I'm going to read this little bit right here. Actually, we'll do the full thing. So from verse 16, and the Lord said unto Moses, saying to Aaron, stretch out thy rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so, for Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man and in beast, and, semicolon, all the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So they tried to copycat God again, and they couldn't. So there were lice upon man and upon beast. When the magician said unto Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. So right there we see the magicians go, I can't do it no... Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to break y'all's ears. I can't do it no more. I'm done. We can't do this. We can't copy this. It's too much. We can't. This is God. And Pharaoh's like, is what now? You've been telling me this whole time that we have multiple gods. What is this God you're talking about? So now he's really like seeing, okay, there is a God. He is real. We gotta figure out something to do with this. And I think he beseeches Moses again to get rid of the lice. And again, he doesn't listen, and he's a dingleberry. And we see now that we go to the next god. God strikes down. So we saw Happy, Hecate, and Geb all get struck down. God shows that he has control over that sphere. No other god has control of that sphere. Then we see Khepri, who is an aspect of Ra, their most important god, who has the head of a scarab or a fly. Most of the time it's a scarab, but in Egyptian mythology they're kind of interchangeable. Not always, but pretty much interchangeable. And the Lord tells Moses, and now Moses is doing the plagues, to stretch his hand over Egypt, and flies came all throughout the land, and they specifically started targeting the Egyptians. They started sparing the Israelites. Where they were staying, flies didn't go. So now it's only targeting the Egyptians and making their life extremely uncomfortable. And to resolve this, Pharaoh, once again, it's kind of funny how every time he's like, I don't need their help. And then he keeps going back and going, okay, I can't fix this. Please, I'm sorry.
Moses, fix this real quick.
But we do see every single time he does that he still holds this air of dignity and trying to make deals with God over and over again. But we see that and shows that, hey, your fly god has no power over the flies, guys. I'm sorry. And then we see Hathor, who's next, who is the goddess of fertility. And this one doesn't show up, but she's got the head. She normally is depicted with the head of a cow.
Well, I mean, it kind of shows it. There's kind of like horns under a sun right there.
Yeah. She is the Egyptian goddess of love and protection. And this plague caused all of the Egyptian, specifically the Egyptian livestock and cattle, to all become sick and afflicted and maimed, and a lot of it died.
Famine.
Lots of food production went straight down to the tank. This really hurt the Egyptians.
The stock profit drops.
Yeah, a lot. They're stonks. Straight out the toilet, guys. But then he shows, hey, your cow goddess, she doesn't have control over y'all's cow. All your cows, all your cattle, all your livestock. Sorry, guys. And then we see the next one, which really, really is going to suck. Oh. Yeah, next one really sucks for the Egyptians. So, I'll dag-nab it. There we go. The next one is Isis. Hopefully we don't get... Sorry, YouTube. I'm sorry. Ice. Wait 3 seconds. She is the goddess of medicine and magic, and her job was to keep the Egyptians healthy and well.
She was the medicine goddess.
She was the medicine goddess. And what God did to show she had no power was he gave all the Egyptians boils on their body, and all their cattle and livestock also got boils on their body, and really made them unclean.
So that was kind of a 2-for-1 deal too. Mm-hmm. It continued on from the cow lady. I call her the cow lady.
He calls her the cow lady. I forgot to give the verses for the rest of things. So for Khepri, the aspect of Ra guy with the flies, that was Exodus chapter 8, verse 21 through 32. And then for Hathor, which was the cow goddess, striking her down, was Exodus chapter 9, verses 2 through 7. And then Isis was chapter 9, Exodus verses 8 through 12. But then she gave them, not she, God gave them boils and cursed them and showed, hey, your goddess that has magic and stuff can't do jack diddly squat. And he really struck two blows. He struck that showed medicine could not help them, and then also that the magic couldn't help them because at this point the magicians are unclean. They can't perform their rituals. Sick. So since they're unclean, they can't perform their rituals. We don't see them the rest of the story now.
Nope.
Once we see that they are covered in boils, they just disappear from the story. Not 100% certain about that, but I'm like 99.8% certain that they just disappear. They're
no, I mean, seen. It might not even necessarily be disappearance.
Well,
it's
just like
they're not, maybe because whenever they became uncleaned.
Yeah, well, they couldn't perform their ceremonial rituals or any of the magic. So the Bible in Exodus no longer mentions the magicians. Because of that. That was really important. I was like, whoa, okay.
There's so much cool, all throughout the New Testament, or no, the Old Testament, you can find links to the New Testament, There's a bunch of, as we've said before, there's 69,000 cross-references?
Yeah, a lot.
It's something like that. And isn't it some with the 10 plagues lines up with part of Jesus' story, especially the last one, the last plague?
You see a lot of stuff that goes between the two. And one of the gods, I was going to mention this later, but one of the gods the Egyptians worshipped was a lamb. Mm-hmm. And what do we see for the Passover? They sacrifice a lamb, and when you sacrifice the lamb, they put the intestines around the head so the juices would roll down, and they hung it with arms to the side and legs bound together.
In a window, right?
Kind of looks like
and it was a cross.
Like Jesus on the cross.
And because they would put it in the window, and what they had for the windows were these sticks, basically, that would go in the middle. Brother Ray taught this to us. Hopefully I'm remembering correctly. They had sticks, and then another sticks that would go this way, and they would kind of open it up and leave it out to dry, essentially.
All right. So moving on to the next goddess, we have Nut, N-U-T, goddess of the sky, and her job was to basically control the sky, make sure the stars appeared and the moon was there and everything else, and for destruction to not rain down from the sky. So what does God do? He makes destruction rain down from the sky. And it's really cool because it has to be God with what happens. So God warns Pharaoh, hey, if you don't let my people go right now and go, not go permanently, just go worship me in the wilderness for several days, then they'll come back. Pharaoh says no.
Mm-hmm.
And so God makes hail and fire rain down from the sky, showing Nut has no control over it. And what's really cool is when he does it, he doesn't destroy the food crops. Not yet. He only destroys their flax and the barley, which the flax was made to make clothes, so it made them very uncomfortable because no new clothes could be made. And the barley, which could be made to make clothes sometimes, but mainly was used for alcohol, drink. Couldn't do that no more. You're losing comfort here. So God's like, hey, I'm making you uncomfortable. Just say yes. Pharaoh says no. And so he warns, hey, next time it's going to be worse. He doesn't listen. Within a couple days. That was Exodus chapter 9, verses 13 through 35, by the way, with the hail and fire. Going to Exodus chapter 10, verses 1 through 20, we see that Seth, which is the next god, sweet Jesus, which is the next god, he is the god of storms and disorder. So he is supposed to be in charge of the storms, and if you appease him, he's supposed to keep them away, or keep bad things away coming from the wind. Well,
and their storms, especially since they're in this relatively dry desert, right? Mm-hmm. It's always going to be some crazy dust storm.
Yeah. When they think of storms, we think of storms like rain and lightning. No. Dust storms there were lightning and sand hitting your face and sanding you and getting your eyes.
It'll get in your eyes. It'll get into every hole of your body.
That's why he was also the god of disorder. Mm-hmm. But with that, God brings not the worst plague, because the worst plague is yet to come, but probably like the second worst plague. So the first time you have flies, they went after the food, but didn't go after all the food. They went after the crops.
It honestly, it progressively gets worse.
Yeah. This is worse, because these are locusts. So God gets Moses to raise his arm over Egypt, over the crops that are left. and with a great east wind, God brings in hordes of locusts, just a massive amount, like an unfathomable amount.
They
And
probably
then they
thought
come
that a dust storm
and-
was coming, but it was a bunch of locusts.
It was locusts. It would probably look like, oh, what the heck is that? And you hear buzz, and just got whacked with locusts.
That's not dust.
That's not dust. They're in my mouth.
The dust is buzzing.
But they went and they ate the food and the crops that were left. So now they're going through intense hunger. The cattle's dead or not good to eat. Their
I mean,
flax and barley are gone.
They
Their
were
crops
already
are
going
gone.
through a famine from the cows before, and
Yeah.
and then they got a little bit of it back, and now it's taken again.
The Egyptians are, but the Israelites are not. The Israelites are safe. Also, I forgot to mention, with the hail, those who believe that God's going to do this, they brought their cows and stuff inside. So their cattle was not touched. The Egyptians who believed, their stuff wasn't touched. Only the Egyptians who did not care and listened to Pharaoh.
There was always some
were
sort
touched.
of insurance, essentially.
God gave them
for
a way
the
out.
people that were faithful to him.
And that's a lesson for today, because God's always going to give you a way out. He's not going to just punish you. He's going to say, hey, if you listen, you are going to be okay. It's when we're like, I got this.
Now
I got
that's
this,
not that's not telling you that everything will be perfectly fine and dandy. They're still in the middle of it, right? They're still witnessing everything bad that's happening. They're still going to have their own issues, but that's due to us having free will.
Yeah. Which is
So.
going to be a topic for
The future.
maybe next week. Who knows?
Secret foreshadowing.
Foreshadow. But then we see that, and then Pharaoh's like, dude, I can't deal with these locusts. Please, Moses, please get them out of here. This is Exodus chapter 10, verses 1 through 20. I don't remember if I said that or not. But then after Moses beseeches the Lord, God brings a west wind this time, a great west wind. And the reason I say great is because it wasn't just like one thing. It was all day and all night it blew. And this time it was to the west, and it deposited, and he threw every single locust in Egypt. Not some, not most, all of the locusts into the Red Sea. And then we see possibly the second greatest, or depending on who you're talking to, the greatest of the Egyptian gods being struck down. Ra, the great god of creation and the sun. Yes, he looks weird and a little bit mad and disappointed in us. We don't care.
I don't know. I think he looks cool.
He does look cool, but he was the god. He was one of the most important gods. He was the god of the sun, and the sun brought life and held a massive amount of religious significance to the Egyptians. Like that was like the big thing.
He was the one. He was the top guy.
Yeah. Put in the reference, he rode the sun, and then when night fell, it was believed that he was down battling the end of the world, and then he came back up to bring everybody light. And he did that every single day. That's what they believed. He went and fought the snake of chaos.
So they thought that he was fighting for roughly the same amount of time every single night.
Yeah, roughly. That's what their belief was, that he'd go into the underworld and go fight the snake Apophis.
So he never killed the snake, though.
No, he can't kill the snake. It's a for them it's an allegory between order and chaos. How it's always battling constantly. Technically, Ra wasn't the god of order. He was the god of creation. The god of order was called Mat.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really cool. Egyptian lore is really cool, but at the same time, it's like
Dark.
so
kind of dark.
So a birdman who rides the sun fights a giant snake thing whose literal whole thing is chaos and destruction, and he's supposed to win every time. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes, that's how it works. That's how it works, guys.
Wait,
Believe
what
us,
do you
the
think-
God who's sending locusts at us and all this stuff, trust me, he's not. Because the sun's still there, right?
They must have
Boom.
been so tripped out whenever an eclipse happened.
Well, gonna mention that.
Yeah.
God's next thing was absolute darkness. So this was Exodus chapter 20, Exodus chapter 10, verses 21 through 29. We see that God literally, it's probably an eclipse. He makes an eclipse happen for 3 days straight. And it's not a normal eclipse to where we see him today, because today, even though there's an eclipse, we see a little bit of light. This was a total eclipse. There was no light. It was absolute darkness.
Those eclipses are still possible, I'm sure, today. It's just they're rare because it takes certain
and for it to
things
line
to
up
align.
perfectly to where to where Moses goes, warning you, this is gonna get bad. You sure you want to continue? And Pharaoh's like, yes.
Thou shalt not see. Huh.
But God made all the light disappear from everybody, everywhere. Like, no light at all. Absolute darkness for everyone but the Israelites. Israelites still had light in their houses, it says.
Something
I
else
actually wanna find that verse.
Something else that I don't know why, this is just a random thought. God could literally just be like, okay, you're not seeing today. Just give that person blindness, essentially, or partial blindness or something, you know? Although it does say darkness, but...
Excuse me. I actually want to read the verses because it's really cool. Starting in verse 21. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand toward heaven, and there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. So not only was this darkness so absolute, but you could feel the darkness. And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days, but all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. So you see that the Egyptians have zero light, none whatsoever, absolute darkness, but the Israelites have light. And then we see in verse 24, And Pharaoh called unto Moses and said, Go ye serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds be stayed, let your little ones also go with you. So the reason he says that is because all the cows gone, so Pharaoh wants to keep the flocks and stuff so he can feed his people, and not feed the Israelites. But Moses is like, we need them for sacrifices. We see that in verse 25. So our cattle has to go with us, and there shall not be a hoof left behind, he says. For therefore we must we take to serve the Lord our God, and we know not with what we must serve the Lord until we come thither. Verse 27, But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. And Pharaoh said unto them, Get thee from me, take heed to thyself, see my face no more, for in that day thou seest my face, thou shalt die. And Moses said, Thou hast spoken well, I will see thy face again no more. So we see right there, Pharaoh went, this is the ultimate showdown. I'm going to kill you if I see you. That's kind of scary. And that brings us to the last and final god, Pharaoh himself. So the Egyptians had this like almost cult-like personality to where they believed that Pharaoh was either the son of Ra made flesh or some kind of supreme
any
god.
of the pharaohs, any of the basically like the king that was in charge at the time, they would see as a god. To them, I mean, I'm not gonna say that. Never mind.
Okay, but yeah, so Pharaoh was a god to the Egyptian people, and a lot of them are like, well, our god's not doing anything, but God is striking down each of them. He's brought religious turmoil to them because they need the sun disappear, showing their greatest, most powerful god of creation, who controls the sun and fights for them every day, holds no power.
Yep.
No power.
None at all.
He is not even a candle to God. He is not even a match.
It's almost
nothing.
like he doesn't exist.
For real, dude. Or he might exist, but he'd be a demon.
Sure.
That's a thing we see, because we see like Poseidon. Poseidon, the Greek god, he is named in the Bible, but he's referred to not as a god, but as a deceiver.
Right,
which
and
is
that's
interesting.
That can always just be a simple, not even. It's a demon tricking people to think
it's interesting.
that there's a god.
I want to talk about it one day, but that's not today. Today we're talking about the Egyptian gods. So the Egyptian. So finally we see Pharaoh, and this plague I think is the hardest plague to deal with, because of how it works. And that one is the death of the firstborn, where the angel of death passes through Egypt. And Moses gives warning unto everyone. We see that in chapter 11 and 12. 11, 1 through 9, Moses is giving warning to all of the Israelites, saying, hey, all the firstborn of everything's going to die. So what you need to do is you need to get a lamb and paint its blood on the doorpost and then enter into your house and not come out during that night. And everyone's like, okay, and those who didn't listen lost their firstborn. And we see it actually enacted in chapter 12, which is the Passover, verses 1 through 30. I'm not going to read it all. But we see it goes through and it kills all the firstborn, all of Egypt gives out a great cry in the middle of the night. Everyone wakes up. Like Pharaoh himself wakes up and finds his firstborn dead. Absolutely just destroyed. Not destroyed, but dead. And it's so heart-wrenching and breaking to everyone in Egypt that Pharaoh goes, all right, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Go. Get out of here. Even the Egyptians were like, make them leave. We can't do this no more. Leave. And even after he lets them go, do you know what Pharaoh does?
Chases after them.
He chases after them.
Again, it's he constantly is switching his like mind.
Well, it's because you gotta understand, slaves back in the day were mega valuable.
I mean,
it was free. It's not free, but it was pretty much free labor. You feed
They
them, and you
use-
house them. That's it.
They used them, and they didn't have to feed them good, just enough for them to be working. So it was the minimum requirements, you know, and
And if you make them work hard enough, you can make them grow their own food.
Yep.
To feed themselves. It
And-
was very efficient.
they would take the slaves, and as far as we know, they were using them to create the pyramids, and which
That's the only way
is
you get it done.
yeah.
Yeah, that'd be so expensive otherwise. What's crazy is we see that, and we see Pharaoh cannot even protect his firstborn. So that strikes Pharaoh down, but God's not done with him. When he chases after the Israelites, he stops them with a great pillar of fire, parts the Red Sea, lets all of the Israelites through, and then Pharaoh chases after them, and God destroys Pharaoh. He crushes the waters inwards and just obliterates him, destroying the final god.
And what's
Egypt.
crazy, they've actually found, I'm sure they've found some
They have.
pieces of evidence of some of the Egyptians' weaponry and stuff down there. But the thing that I'm talking about is they actually saw a path where it seemed as if the dirt had rose up somewhere. The dirt rose up and basically a straight line from one side to the other. So, I mean, that could very well be the exact place where it rose
Brother
up.
Ray showed a thing one morning. I think this is it. This is one of the spokes of the chariot wheel made of, I think, bronze. And that was one of the Egyptian things were made of. And we see, actually, the Red Sea...
Do you know what I'm talking about, though? That bridge where it looks like dirt just came up and it's...
Yes, that's what's been pulling up. Can we see it right here? No, not really. Come on, where is it? Okay, well, I have this...
This is a topographical map.
So this right here, this is really cool. So this is Egypt, right? And we know that there were pillars made by the Israelites later here and across in Saudi Arabia. The Arabs, the Saudis broke it and took it down because they were afraid of what it would signify.
Mm-hmm.
But you see in the water, and I can't find the picture right now, but there is a land bridge stretching between the two that's covered in water. And it's possible that it can be receded by a good enough force for someone to cross. That's insane. Because people are like, oh, they just went on the shallow. And well, no, that wouldn't explain why the Pharaoh's army got destroyed.
The way they depict it a lot of the times is the water raising upward, not necessarily the water being pushed down in a way to where it goes to both sides of that little bridge, essentially. You know?
I'm looking for a specific thing because I remember seeing it and it was
Yeah.
really important, really, really cool. And I was like, what?
Something else that I'd want to bring up, though, is there's this neat book. There's this guy who was questioning his wife about God because she was a new Christian and stuff, and he was a scientist. Or not necessarily a scientist, but he was always going into research or some sort of research. And so he started going into the Bible, and he started going into multiple other sources, and what he found was instead of convincing his wife that God doesn't exist, he convinced himself that God does exist because of all the historical evidence that he found of Jesus.
God was like, you think I don't exist, son? Here you go. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry, guys. I keep clapping. I'm so sorry. Here's some evidence, boy.
I haven't read it yet, but the book's called The Case for Christ. They've made a movie of it. But I want to read the book because I feel like it'll have more of the facts in it than the movie.
Yeah, that's true. Books are typically better than the movie.
Well, I'm not saying better. It's just going to give you more of the facts straight from the person.
I think books are better than the movie. Just how it be. But yeah, that was the final thing. Destroying Pharaoh just completely obliterated the gods of Egypt. And God does this several times in the... Excuse me. My nose. Does this several times in the Bible where he will show gods and then show how inconsequential they are and that they don't exist. Like the god Baal with the prophet... is it Jeremiah?
I don't know anything about the gods, bro.
No. It's when the prophets of Baal, they're slicing their wrists. And
Yes, I know
calling
exactly
God-
what you're
they're calling
talking
on the
about.
God to bring
And
fire down
right,
from above.
and
And
then
he can't. And then I
who
can't
is
remember who
it?
the prophet is. I'm looking it up. It's gonna
he
bug the
says
crap
one
out of me.
prayer. They can't get it to happen, and they say one. He says one prayer to God, and fire. They even drench. Then they put a moat around it. They drench the cattle that they're trying to burn in water.
Elijah.
And
Sweet Lord.
he prays to God, and fire just comes down and
Boom,
completely
consumes it.
obliterates
And
it.
it was the prophet Elijah, not Jeremiah. I don't know why I thought Jeremiah. It's Elijah. Elijah had his whole sacrifice covered in water, a trench of
moat.
water around it, a moat, and just doused it. And then there was not a lot of water at the time, so doing this was very expensive. And fire came down and consumed everything. The moat was dry. Everything was consumed. And the Baals, they're cutting their wrists. They're, Baal, hear us, call Father, fire. And Elijah actually made fun of him, saying, maybe God's asleep. Maybe he's on the toilet. Can he not hear you? Is your God so weak that he can't show himself? And then Elijah does one prayer, and instantaneously
Which
God
again
shows his
brings
power.
up the question of, like, about the statement we've made before about the Bible. If your God's so weak that he couldn't take somebody's hand and write it,
What he wanted.
yeah,
I feel pretty sorry for your God.
Yeah, I mean he can create an entire universe, but he can't create a book. Okay,
Yeah, he can't stop a man from going. I don't want to say thou, I want to say thee. No, you're gonna put thou. Like I'd like. If you think God can't control how someone writes the Bible, feeling like you're putting a limit on God that you probably shouldn't be putting on him.
well, and it's not even
Like-
necessarily. I don't think God made them. God influenced them
He
to
kept them from
make
writing
them.
what he didn't want. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. They wanted to do God's bidding, and
They allowed God to
yeah.
use them as a vessel.
Yeah, they weren't resistant to him. And if they didn't want to, God would find another person.
They
who
were
would.
they were God's anointed.
Yeah. So that was the 10 plagues of Egypt and how God struck them all down. We hope you enjoyed today's lesson and that it made sense to you. Go back through because this is I think it's really cool.
It's pretty fascinating. I don't know much about Egyptian gods, but I mean that's why I didn't talk much. But it's still pretty fascinating, you know. So I learned along with you guys.
Yeah.
Now maybe you should put a question down because
Do it.
I don't-
Questions. We don't always have.
we're doing all the
infinite
work
knowledge.
here, y'all. Come on
Please,
now.
come on. We will gladly do more work. But
We will ignore our questions and we'll do yours.
yeah,
Okay.
your questions are more important. The whole series was made so that we can answer your questions. Please comment.
Sorry, I don't mean to be so aggressive.
We will see you guys tomorrow at 7 for Wednesday night service. And if not then, we'll see you Sunday
Dude, I
at
thought
10
you-
o'clock or 11 o'clock. Or next Tuesday when we do our next
Yeah, I
lesson.
thought you were about to say we were doing a lesson tomorrow. I was like, Ryan, that's not until
That's not
next
next
week.
And do comment because if you don't, well, we're just going to do our own topic, which if no one comments, then we're going to do the topic of free will, why we have it, how we have it, why it's important.
When? No.
When
when.
we got it. But see you guys tomorrow. We love you all. And this was Close Up with Jesus. There we go. See y'all next week and tomorrow.